That escalated quickly. We didn't have a whole lot of fantasy relevant trades go down before the deadline, but the final day did bring us at least enough that things have been shaken up and we got a lot of new names that you might want to stash because of some players that were on the move. Remember, it's always about opportunity. So let's figure out what are some players that are freely available on waivers that you can pick up right now before they get their chance. Now, the first player I'm going to talk about actually is getting his opportunity, unfortunately, due to injury. We know Tucker Kraft is done for the year. A brutal blow. I mean, he was a tight end 3 in fantasy scoring so far, but he is done. And you know, the Packers constantly battling injuries there at the wide receiver room as well. Jaden Reed's still out. Matthew Golden just got shaken up with a shoulder injury. Christian Watson somehow is still in one piece for now. But look, at the tight end position, the next man up is Luke Musgrave. And a lot of people probably have just forgotten the fact that Luke Musgrave was actually drafted before Tucker Kraft in that same draft class. Remember, this was a second round pick because he just tested out better than Kraft. I mean, he had really good metrics. He was supposed to be one of the top tight ends in a really good, deep tight end class. He just didn't do it. You know, he has had some injuries as well, but basically last year, Tucker Kraft just passed him by, and Kraft has been elite, as you've seen. But now it's Musgrave's turn to prove, hey, I was actually worth a second round pick. Yeah, Musgrave was taken 8 picks after Sam Laporta and 7 picks after Michael Mayer. And in that same round, you know, we also saw other tight ends like Luke Schoonmaker, Brenton Strange. The round before, Dalton Kincaid. I mean, it was a loaded tight end group, but Musgrave was supposed to be one of the best. Like his rookie season was okay, mixed results, had some flashes there, 352 yards, just 1 touchdown. But second season, really barely played and just wasn't himself. And then, like I said, just got behind Kraft on the depth chart. And this season, we haven't really seen much of him at all. A total of 9 catches for 88 yards. Now he's got a shot here, and I think they're just going to have to use him. The tight end position cannot just disappear from this offense. Again, Musgrave has the athletic ability. That is not the question. And his role in this offense now is pretty much cemented. Will he take advantage is the question. I mean, look, I'm not going to go out and rush to make sure I get him. I'm not going to spend up too much fab if you even need to at this point to get a guy like Musgrave. Even if you did have Tucker Kraft, there are probably still other tight ends available on the waiver wire that might be more useful immediately, but there is upside here. So if you did lose Kraft or you're just still looking for somebody better at tight end, he's probably going to be, you know, one of the more interesting options out there. All right, now let's talk trade. So, one receiver who needed a fresh start, you're going to hear that term a lot when referring to Adonai Mitchell. Yeah, out of Indy and now with the Jets. Talk about a team that needed a receiver of some sort, any sort. It's the Jets. So, AD Mitchell, let's face it, this year his big highlight was the infamous fumble right before the goal line. Not the caused fumble, but the let's celebrate by dropping the ball at the 1 yard line for reasons that I still don't understand, but it continues to happen. Yeah, so AD Mitchell, like it happens. But this wasn't the only mistake Mitchell made, right? This is just kind of par for the course for him. He had made a lot of mental mistakes his rookie season. That's why he didn't quite crack, you know, that rotation at receiver. And they have good receivers there already, as you see with Pittman and with Downs and with Pierce. And then this preseason, we heard all sorts of hype. Mitchell looked like the best player on the field, but yet didn't get his opportunity because he just couldn't break through. And then when he finally made that play, he basically ruined it. So, I mean, his time in Indy was done, right? And I think fresh start is good for both sides here. Now, the Colts clearly got what they wanted in that deal with Sauce Gardner. But with the Jets, not just the draft picks, but look, take a shot on a very talented player. Remember, Mitchell was a second round pick last year. You know, the Colts identified him as a value. He still has all that talent, that ability, just needs the opportunity. He's definitely going to have the chance, at least, to get a target share there with the Jets because they have absolutely nothing after Garrett Wilson. And before the bye, they didn't even have Garrett Wilson. Now, he should come back this next week, but Josh Reynolds on IR. Nobody else to speak of on that roster really worth getting heavy target share. So Mitchell really does have a chance to make an immediate impact if he can get his act together. Now, as far as his role there, this is where it's kind of unfortunate, not the best situation, and I don't just mean because the Jets are terrible. Matt Harmon of Reception Perception, broke down Mitchell's rookie year and says that really he would profile best as an X receiver, just a true X receiver, and just give him the chance to see if he can do that. The problem is the Jets already have that with Garrett Wilson. So it will be interesting to see exactly how he's used in that offense and exactly how many targets are there to go around. But look, talented player, new opportunity here, worth the stash. Now, the bigger name player that was traded, finally, mercifully, Jacoby Myers got his way out of Vegas. He's with Jacksonville. So that solves their problem. But now that means somebody's got to get those targets besides Brock Bowers at wide receiver there in Vegas. And, well, let's start with the obvious one. It's Trey Tucker. Now, Trey Tucker seems more like just a pickup, not a stash. But his roster rate on Yahoo is less than 40%. He's still available in quite a few leagues. I know everyone's going to pick up on this because, yeah, he's going to be the number one receiver there for the Raiders. But you could probably stash him in a lot of those leagues because I don't think that he's going to be universally owned, even just because this trade was made. And here's the other reason I say stash with Tucker. I mean, you say wide receiver one. Okay, well, that seems pretty valuable in fantasy. But look, Jacoby Myers hasn't exactly been hogging targets lately. He missed a game. Brock Bowers has been out. Trey Tucker had that one monster week where he caught 3 touchdowns, was the highest scoring receiver back in week 3. Well, since then, he hasn't scored a single touchdown or even topped 70 yards in a game. So, look, keep the expectations realistic here. He's going to have some value, but he's not going to be a guy you just want to plug in your flex or anything like that. He's a bench stash. But that deal also opens the door for Jack Bech, the rookie. Now, we already talked about Bech here before a couple of weeks ago. For this exact reason, what if Jacoby Myers gets traded? Well, here we go. Now, Bech is the guy you should be interested in. Dante Thornton has basically fallen off the map here. He's been a healthy scratch lately. He's a project, and we always knew he would be. And so, look, in your dynasty leagues, sure, keep him. In your redraft leagues, you shouldn't think about it. I think you can at least consider Bech. Like, I don't expect him to get a ton of targets here because, again, this offense is going to be Bowers first, probably Tucker next. Bech should be the guy who is the number 2 receiver in this offense. Let's just hope that Pete Carroll doesn't fall back to his old ways and try to make Tyler Lockett into, one of their top receivers here. It's nice that he's there, and sure, he can be out there running routes and stuff. He shouldn't be commanding a bunch of targets, though. Look, Bech has the size and the hands that he could be a red zone threat at the very least. Trey Tucker has shown that he's their best receiver, but not a very big guy, right? When you get to the red zone, it should be one of the tight ends or it should be Bech. Still got plenty more receivers and one running back to discuss. First, real quick, I just want to make sure you're aware about the Draft Lane app. It's free to download on the App Store or the Play Store. And if you right now use code ENDGAME when you are on Draft Lane, you'll get 10 free points to use towards your questions. We answer questions on Draft Lane all the time, and so you can use that if you can't catch the live streams or if you just want to use the convenience of your phone. Another young receiver that's going to get his chance due to injury, it's going to be Jalen Lane in Washington. Yeah, this team is quickly falling apart. Remember when they were supposed to be these dark horse favorites for Super Bowl contender? Things change quickly in the NFL. Look, it's not just Jane Daniels being out. Terry McLaurin again with that same quad injury. Who knows when he's coming back? And then Luke McCaffrey is not coming back. Remember, he was a thing for a couple of weeks. His season is over. So here we go. It's Debo, not exactly, the picture of health himself. And Jalen Lane has got to get more touches here. And he kind of did last week, had 5 targets getting involved here. They need something. He's going to be that vertical threat. He's mostly there for special teams, right? He's a kick returner. He's their speed guy, 4.3, 4.40. He has that straightaway speed, but they're going to have to use him on some short and horizontal breaking routes as well. And you know what? This is going to be a guy. I hate to just keep using the same lazy comp here, but like Wan'Dale Robinson, right? See what he's been doing for the Giants. Jalen could do similar things. And actually, if there's a comp that comes to mind, he actually reminds me a little bit, for those who've been playing fantasy for a while or just watching the NFL, of another former Virginia Tech player, Eddie Royal, a guy who's mostly valuable as a special teamer, right? Return guy, but once in a while could pop off, right? Make some big plays down the field. Was really only involved when they needed him, but that's kind of where Jalen Lane is at. Now, a more recognizable rookie, Kyle Williams, New England, has hardly done anything this year. I mean, he's fallen behind guys like Kayshon Boutte. Of course, they got Stephon Diggs looking good there. And so, yeah, Williams just not done a whole lot. But now he might get his chance. And we saw it last week when Boutte went out early in that game with a hamstring injury. Williams actually saw the field. He was out there for over 60% of the routes. And Coach Mike Vrabel even said, by name specifically, Kyle Williams will have a bigger role this week. Now, last week he was out there running a lot of routes, but he wasn't getting targeted. So, do we mean that he's actually just going to be on the field more, or is he actually going to be involved in the passing game? It would be nice because, Drake May is looking borderline elite these days, and that passing game is working. And so, if Boutte's out and Williams is in, could he actually do something that makes us take notice? And Williams is another one of those guys who drew a lot of praise throughout training camp and the preseason, thought he might actually have a role to start the season. It just hasn't happened yet. And so we're going to have to see it first, right? Again, this is purely a stash. I'm not rushing to start Kyle Williams. Demario Douglas is the guy who really stepped up in terms of production last week, and he's your guy who's more fantasy relevant if you need a flex, but let's keep an eye towards Williams to see if he can do something. All right, now into the running back. You know the name, Tank Bigsby. You know that Tank Bigsby has not been any sort of relevant this year because instead of being the RB1 for Jacksonville, he's been the RB very distant to for Philadelphia. Got a guy named Saquon. Except what if Saquon still has that nagging injury? What if it bothers him enough that he is limited or even out in week 10? Now, I don't expect that to happen, but again, this is how handcuffs work. What if this bothers him later in the season? What if Tank Bigsby's shown enough that maybe at least he gets a few carries? Okay, that's probably not going to happen. But Tank Bigsby has shown that he definitely can do something in Philadelphia because we saw it right before the bye. He ran for 104 yards on just 9 carries, which is amazing because all season up until that point, he had a grand total of 23 yards on 6 carries. Now, you don't need me to tell you there's massive upside in this Philadelphia Eagle run game. Look, Tank Bigsby, I liked him a lot this preseason. I was kind of surprised when they just let him go for nothing. Travis Etienne hasn't exactly shined this season in the job. He looked great for a couple weeks early on, not so much lately. But look, if something goes down with Barkley, you want Tank Bigsby. I know that it's not exactly fun to stash these RBs who don't get touches without injuries, and you're just holding on to these handcuffs all season long. We are not that far from the playoffs. At this point, you've got a guy like Barkley. You need to get Bigsby. You've got a guy like JT. You need to get Giddens, etc. Do you need a part of the Cleveland Browns passing game? Probably not. But if you do want a piece of that for some reason, I'm going to say it's not Jerry Jeudy, but maybe Cedric Tillman, who is now ready to come back. Looks like he's going to be practicing in week 10 and could finally return after being injured. Now, Tillman was looking like he might be, dare I say, a breakout this season. Week 1, 5 catches, 52 yards, and a touchdown. The next week, another touchdown. Was looking good with Joe Flacco there in Cleveland. And then he got hurt. And now Flacco's gone. And so, yeah, it is still Dylan Gabriel. And I know that severely limits the upside of everybody in this offense. I mean, at least in the passing game. But look, Cedric Tillman has looked better than Jerry Jeudy when he's been out there. Cedric Tillman does have touchdown upside. He's a player who might at least help out this passing game. I doubt they're going to open it up much or anything like that. But look, Tillman is one of those players that you could throw in your flex if you need to when there's a positive matchup. Another potential winner from the trade deadline. Well, the Saints finally moved Rashid Shaheed. So that means maybe they'll actually utilize the guy they traded for this preseason. Remember Devon Vele, former Denver Bronco? Yeah, Vele has barely even been on the field, which really makes you wonder why they actually traded a draft pick for him. Well, here's his shot, right? Shaheed is gone. They need Vele. He's going to slot into the slot, right? That's what he does. He'll do some returning as well. So, look, I get it. This is kind of like what I just said about the Cleveland pass offense. You can't get too thrilled about this New Orleans Saints offense anyway, but there are targets up for grabs. He's going to get some. Let's see if he makes the most of his opportunity. And then in Arizona, we've seen veteran journeyman quarterback Jacoby Brissett make the most of his opportunity. He has basically won that starting job. Don't believe that when they say that Kyler Murray is still not healthy. So what we've seen now is it's still basically Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison. And a pretty distant third there is Michael Wilson. But you might have noticed over the past 3 weeks with Brissett at quarterback, Wilson at least has jumped up to being somewhat productive. Over the last 5 weeks, he's averaged almost 5 targets per game. Now, he's only averaged 35 yards per game and he hasn't scored a touchdown. But over the last 3 weeks, that yardage has gone up. And look, we've at least seen this pass game be a little bit more consistent, right? Fewer mistakes, fewer errant throws. And Michael Wilson is one of those players who still has that big play ability. We just haven't seen it much because it's a pretty conservative offense, but at the same time, they should be getting Trey Benson back in the running game. That should help a little bit. And you know what? I don't usually advise handcuffing a wide receiver, but if something happens to Harrison, Michael Wilson does get a boost. There are plenty of interesting names out there that you could stash right now, or get these guys before they go off if you got some room on your bench. And don't forget this week your waiver wire ads, your priority pickups, your panic players, start sit, everything you need to win in week 10 is in the playlist.